International news. Border guards foil an arms smuggling attempt from Syria, seizing over 1,400 light and medium weapons. The International Criminal Court opens a preliminary examination into possible war crimes, despite Israeli protests. And tension remains high on the Syrian and Lebanese borders as Hezbollah vows retaliation following a deadly Israeli airstrike. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, called on the Civil Defense Department to check on services provided during emergencies. The King said he is proud of the advanced level of the Civil Defense Department, in line with its humanitarian mission to protect lives and property and safeguard national accomplishments from various risks. His Majesty also hailed the efforts of the civil defense personnel, especially in emergency and unusual circumstances. The King hailed all civil defense crews that had carried out an outstanding professional role during the recent snowstorm. Border guards on the northern border have thwarted an attempt to smuggle large amounts of light and medium weapons from Syria into the kingdom. An official source at the Armed Forces General Command headquarters said troops seized more than 1,464 firearms, which were loaded in a GMT vehicle that was stopped as it drove at high speed across the frontier. The government will meet with the Lower House's Energy and Finance Committees tomorrow to discuss the National Electricity Company's huge deficit, which it had accumulated over the past years due to rising global oil prices. The two sides will try to agree whether to freeze or abolish a government decision to hike electricity tariffs and keep or modify current prices. The government had said it would modify power tariffs starting in the new year, but had deferred the decision in the face of fierce opposition by lawmakers. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour chaired the first meeting of the Board of Air Ambulance Centre after the air ambulance system was launched. The centre was founded upon a directive by His Majesty the King to provide air paramedic service in the country. The King has donated 2 helicopters to start the service and will cover maintenance expenses for 2 years. The Council discussed the centre's goal of providing specialised services to the rescue and air ambulance and to transfer the injured, especially in remote areas, to specialised centres and protect lives. The Private Hospital Association President and board member of the Air Ambulance Centre, Fawzi Hammouri, thanked the King for his order to set up the centre and his donation of the fully equipped helicopters for emergency medical services. Minister of State for Media Affairs Mohammed Al-Momeni said Jordan's stance toward the Syrian refugee crisis is based on humanitarian grounds, taking into account the kingdom's national interest. During a meeting with the U.S. student delegation from Harvard University, Momeni said the influx of refugees had placed huge burdens on the national economy. He said the hosting of hundreds of thousands of displaced Syrians had put pressure on the state budget, national resources, infrastructure, education, health and labour sectors. Momeni, who is the government spokesman, called for a political solution which guarantees Syria's unity and stability and the return of the refugees to their country. He also said Jordan supports Russian efforts to host a meeting of all Syrian parties to find a political solution to the conflict. In other news now, the International Criminal Court, ICC, launched a preliminary examination into possible war crimes in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. The examination, which may open a path to possible charges against Israelis or Palestinians, was branded as an outrage by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The head of the analysis unit at the prosecutor's office at the ICC said the process to opening a possible full investigation could take from a few months to a few years. Prosecutors have said they would examine in full independence and impartiality crimes that may have occurred since June the 13th last year.
It's important to understand that a preliminary examination is not an investigation. It is a process in the course of which the office will gather information on alleged crimes committed in Palestine since June of last year. And then we will assess this information, and at the end of the process we will decide whether to open an investigation or close the matter, or possibly we will need further information.
Continuing his Middle East tour, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Reuven Rivlin. During a joint news conference, Netanyahu said Israel was facing threats from Iran and would defend itself. Abe is scheduled to meet tomorrow with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in the city of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. The Japanese Prime Minister told Netanyahu Tokyo is committed to help revive collapsed peace talks with the Palestinians.
Japan will continue up our active engagement for the purpose of regional stability in the Middle East peace process and other efforts with the understanding on the difficult environment of Israel. Tomorrow I shall be visiting Palestine as well, and therefore, as a genuine friend, I might offer advices that may not be easy to swallow to both of the parties.
Abe also visited East Jerusalem's Christian shrines and the Western Wall during his three-day visit to Israel and the occupied West Bank. Elsewhere, the Prime Minister's wife, Aki Abe, paid a visit to the Arab-Jewish hand-in-hand school in Beit Safafa neighborhood in occupied East Jerusalem, where Palestinian and Israeli children study together in Arabic and Hebrew. Aki met with school staff and students and attended a primary school lesson. The school, a symbol of coexistence in occupied Jerusalem, was torched last November by suspected Jewish extremists who have since then been arrested but have not yet stood trial. Dozens of ultra-Orthodox Jews forced their way into occupied East Jerusalem's AlAqsa Mosque compound in the latest breach of the sanctity of the holy site. Witnesses said the extremists, including Jewish settlers, broke into the mosque grounds under the escort of Israeli police. The intrusion had infuriated Palestinian worshippers and religious students who had gathered to stop the Jewish extremists. The Israeli police had temporarily held the identity cards of Palestinian women and youth before allowing them into the compound. Supporters of Lebanon's Hezbollah group turned out in force to bury the son of the group's late commander. Jihad Mughniya was one of 6 fighters who died in an Israeli airstrike in neighboring Syria that also killed an Iranian general. The Israeli attack has ratcheted up tension along the border with Syria and Lebanon. Here's more.
Tension remains high on the Syrian-Israeli border amid fears a deadly Israeli airstrike could draw retaliation. Israeli forces took up positions along the borderline a day after an Israeli helicopter struck in Syria, killing Jihad Mughniya, a commander from Lebanon's Hezbollah, and 6 of Hezbollah members in all. Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards confirmed the death of one of their generals. Israel has not officially commented on the air raid, but an Israeli security source confirmed Israel had carried it out. It wasn't clear what role Mughniya, the son of the group's late military leader Imad Mughniya, was playing in the fighting in Syria. Several Israeli tanks took up positions near the Quneitra crossing, and Israeli soldiers patrolled the snow-topped mountain area. An Israeli defense official said escalation was possible. Israeli media claimed the men who were killed had been plotting to attack or capture northern towns. Israel struck Syria several times since the start of the civil war, mostly destroying weaponry such as missiles that Israeli officials alleged were destined for Hezbollah. On the Lebanon border with Israel, the Lebanese army and UN peacekeepers ran patrols along the border following the strike, but the frontier appeared calm. Thousands of Hezbollah supporters marched in the southern suburbs of Beirut for the funeral of the younger Mughniya.
The people of this region are proud of his martyrdom and believe that they are on the right path in the fight against the Zionist enemy, and that our region has a very clear compass and direction when fighting the enemy.
The attacks comes just days after Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said frequent Israeli strikes in Syria were a major aggression and the group was stronger than before, and that Syria and its allies had the right to respond. The group has vowed retaliation for the attack. Loib Al-Qar for the news at 10.
Kurdish Peshmerga fighters said they are winning the battle against IS militants as fighting continues in the Syrian border town of Kobani. A Kurdish Peshmerga soldier said the militants were only in control of 3 of Kobani's 13 neighborhoods after months of fighting in the Syrian border town. Elsewhere, an army cargo plane carrying food and ammunition was shot down in Idlib. Al-Qaeda wing said Nusra Front downed the military cargo plane overnight above a military airport, but Syrian state television blamed the loss of the aircraft and its crew on bad weather. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 35 people on board died when the plane hit an electricity pylon. Thousands rallied across the Muslim world to protest against French magazine Charlie Hebdo's publication of anti-Islamic cartoons. The demonstrations were staged over Charlie Hebdo's latest cartoon that was deemed blasphemous to the Muslim faith. More in this report.
Hundreds of thousands took to the streets in cities across the Muslim world. The rallies were to condemn the publication of cartoons by Charlie Hebdo magazine, which are seen as insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Hamas security forces allowed a raid rally by rival activists in Gaza Strip to denounce the cartoon, which was published after deadly attacks by 3 gunmen in France 2 weeks ago. In Pakistan, a large crowd of displaced people from Waziristan region joined local tribesmen on the streets of the northwestern town of Bannu to protest against the satirical French magazine. Hundreds of thousands also staged a rally in Russia's Chechnya region to protest against the French magazine. Demonstrators said the cartoons hurt the sentiments of Muslims around the world.
I think we, Muslims, have been insulted all over the world. Our religious feelings are hurt, and our religious right is also hurt. And I think it is a duty of every Muslim to come out and take part in this march, not to demonstrate aggression, not to demonstrate the superiority of one religion over another, but simply to show that the good is greater than the evil.
Charlie Hebdo's issue immediately sparked outrage from Muslims and Islamist groups. Last week, rallies were held in many countries, including Algeria, Syria, India, Pakistan, and the Philippines. Hiba Atoum for the news at 10.
Yemeni Interior Minister Jalal al-Ruwayshan said a ceasefire has gone into effect in the capital Sana'a after hours of fighting between the army and Houthi militiamen. The Houthi movement fought artillery battles with the army near the presidential palace in Sana'a, drawing accusations that the militia fighters were mounting a coup. Explosions echoed across the city and plumes of dark smoke hung over downtown buildings as the most intense clashes brought everyday life to a halt. A government minister said the Houthis had seized the state news agency and television station. Medical sources said 5 people had been killed and more than 20 wounded. World heads of state and government will join business leaders at the opening of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland tomorrow. Various major issues will be tackled by the annual meeting, from the price of oil, global security, the threat of terrorism, and the future of the internet. Here's more.
Security is stepped up in the Swiss ski resort of Davos. Police set up barricades and began closing some streets ahead of the formal opening tomorrow of the annual World Economic Forum, WEF. More than 1,500 business leaders and 40 heads of state or government will attend the January 21st to 24th meeting. The gathering will try to network or discuss major themes, from the price of oil to the future of the internet. It will also tackle global security with sessions on Ukraine, Egypt, and the Middle East, especially the post-threat by militants. But one issue that will be widely discussed during the 4-day meeting is global inequality. The anti-poverty charity group Oxfam released a report saying more than half the world's wealth will be owned by just 1% of the population by next year.
The clear message that governments should take away from Davos is that they should tax the rich. They should tax rich people and rich corporations progressively and fairly. Rich individuals, and particularly the richest individuals, should pay a reasonable level of tax, the kinds of levels of tax they were paying as recently as the 1990s.
Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and chairman of the WEF, echoed Oxfam's desire to address the issue of global inequality.
And in our own work, where, for example, with the risk report, we push this issue of social inclusion, being environmentally and socially more sustainable in our economic and in our policies, business policies. I myself have written a lot about it. I think we consider ourselves, together with Oxfam, rather a pioneer in making this issue known and to make the leaders aware that they have a special responsibility not to follow here only their own interests, but to take care of the interests of those who are outside the Congress Hall.
This year, the WEF takes place in the midst of upheaval, with security forces on heightened alert after attacks in Paris. According to the WEF's annual Global Risks Report, worries about international conflict are a major concern for the global community, though economic fears are still very real. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
We begin with tennis. Roger Federer strolled into the second round of the Australian Open with a clinical 6-4, 6-2, 7-5 rout of Taiwan's Lu Yen-sun. The 33-year-old Swiss was impenetrable on serve and charged around the court like a teenager to preserve his unbeaten record in the first round at Melbourne Park in his 16th appearance. The Swiss player will play Italian Simone Bolelli in the next round. And in the women's division, Maria Sharapova of Russia recorded a 6-4, 6-1 victory against Petra Matrej to advance to the second round. Sharapova will now meet compatriot Alexandra Panova after she beat Romania's Sorana Cristi 7-5, 6-love. American Lindsey Vonn became the most successful female in Alpine Skiing World Cup history when she won a Super G. This is her 63rd victory in the competition. Vonn was tied with Austrian Annemarie Moser-Preuel on 62 wins after her triumph in yesterday's downhill at the same Italian course. Anna Feringer of Austria came in second place, while Liechtenstein's Stina Bayratta was third. Now let's have a look at the weather forecast. Cold tonight with frost formation, especially across the hilly areas and the desert region, while winds will be southeasterly light to moderate. A slight rise in temperature forecast tomorrow will create relatively cold weather in the hilly areas and pleasant in the Jordan Valley. Winds tomorrow will be southwesterly moderate. The Port of Aqaba should expect a chilly night and fair conditions tomorrow with northerly fresh winds and slightly choppy seas. Next to the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, our top stories once again. Border guards foil an arms smuggling attempt from Syria, seizing over 1,400 light and medium weapons. The International Criminal Court opens a preliminary examination into possible war crimes despite Israeli protests. And tension remains high on the Syrian and Lebanese borders as Hezbollah vows retaliation following a deadly Israeli airstrike. And that's the end of tonight's news. Thank you so much for your time.